Good morning and welcome to Gunner Shot. As you can see, it's great to have John Helmer back on Gunner Shot and, of course, with Brig Arun Sahgal. We're going to do a lot of interesting discussion today. We're going to go all around the globe, right? Uh, at the outset, I must tell everyone that, look, John was here a few days back in Delhi. He spent some time in Delhi. He interacted with the strategic community in India and went back. I missed him because, I was busy firing that projectile which you saw at the beginning of the show. I was in Jaisalmer, so I couldn't do all that. But then we have John and Brigadier Sahgal here. Let's get going. John, first off to you. How was your trip to Delhi and what did you get your impression? What are your impressions about India now that you've been interacted with a whole lot of us up close?
Thank you, Ravi. I think I was exactly like you. I was test firing a few, in my case, unarmed rockets, and see how they hit the target. I'm very grateful to both you and Brigadier Sahgal for helping arrange the trip to Delhi. It was the week before President Putin arrived, so the timing was very good for everybody to ask the question what was to be expected of President Putin's meetings with Prime Minister Modi. And as we know, since then, they had the two heads of government had a private conversation for at least 2.5 hours with only one interpreter present. That's a very good sign that all the optics were excellent. Without getting into the details, unless Arun wants particularly to talk about the details, I think that the most remarkable thing from my personal point of view, this was my first real time in India. I'd spent lots of time in Delhi airport on my way to different places. I'd spent in the back a long time ago, a time in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, during the government of Prime Minister Jayawardena. And I was on World Bank advisory mission in Lahore. So I'd been on either side, you might say, of India, but never the central kingdom, so to speak. And this was eye-opening, especially the timing now. I'd have to say that while and we'll come back to this in a minute, while the European and American communities are engaged in a sort of losing war of the civilizations, a losing war for world trade, a losing war on the battlefield. What struck me in my meetings with Indian colleagues and friends was the extremely high level of confidence, professional competence in the Indian role for the future. I don't, pardon me for saying this, but I don't often go into realms or in countries where there is quite so much justification for hope for the future. But I would have to say that Delhi and Indian sentiment is more hopeful for the future than I'm used to seeing or used to being exposed to. And I'm very grateful for that because I was getting rather depressed.
Yeah, I think the world needs at least one major country which is hopeful of the future. And I go with your sentiment, and that's the interesting thing in India. And echoing what he says, what do you see is very hopeful about India and its future? I mean, let me get your perspective, and we do a match the following kind of a thing.
That's to me or to Arun?
To Brigadier Sahgal, yeah. I'll get back to you on this.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I think the dynamism is primarily an account of 2-3 factors. One is the relative stability of the government in the country, the continuing economic growth, the people. There are a huge amount of shortcomings, but the people are not echoing those shortcomings or not going down the street because they believe that their leaders are conversant with those shortcomings and they are taking steps to mitigate them. So there is a perception that the leadership of the country would be able to provide answers to their problems. Third issue is there is also a degree of confidence in that the way the country has not bowed down to the stark tactics of coercive tactics of United States, particularly taking into the tariff issue and the trade, and otherwise bulldozing us in terms of trying to say that I've solved this problem, I sorted that problem out, I got the conflict resolved, etc. Uh, and and another element which is making people feeling a bit of rest assured uh, is the fact is that Mr. Putin was invited to Delhi, featured in Delhi, and they had a reasonable good discussions in Delhi. Like John says, I'm aware of the fact that there are elements which are not in the press, but which were discussed, and which is an area of strategic convergences. Those have all been discussed, and there have been a certain degree of tangible results achieved. There's also a process of moving forward in trade, although which is stuck if you take out the oil part. But there is this whole degree is that the government of the day in India is going all out to create a scenario in which it has good trade relationships outside the American equation and try and build up the gap, fill up the gap which has been created in terms of trade. 50% trade tariffs on India. So there is also a perception within the system is that we have demonstrated a certain degree of technological military capacities and capabilities, and we think that we are on the right path. Mind you, there is an acceptance that there are a large number of gaps, there are areas that we need to improve ourselves, but the perception is that we will be able to overcome these problems, particularly because of the involvement and the investment of the political establishment. Of course, there are other areas where people are not very happy, but that's the sign of when a visitor comes out from abroad and who's looking at science, he sees a degree of positivity amongst the interlocutors, which is, I would say, very satisfying.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. I think that's my sentiment too. And I'm now not talking as an Indian, but if I were a neutral observer, that's what I'd see. A country which is growing at the pace at which is growing, despite all its faults and despite all its gaps, it's still making a difference. And it is able to toe a line which is meant for itself, displaying a level of strategic autonomy, holding true to its friendships, and keeping its those people inimical interests out of the equation. And these inimical interests are all around. So with this as a background, and I think India is going up the value chain in the global order, and it has to play a major role in the world order as it goes along. So John, with this, what you exposed and what you rather experienced in Delhi, and what we've seen, and what is the general commentary, and what you have also analyzed of the discussions between Mr. Putin and our Prime Minister. Where do you see India going, and what role do you see India playing in the global order as you see it? Because before we take on other subjects.
Well, thank you for the question, Ravi. It was really encouraging from Russian point of view to see how happy, appreciative, relaxed, culturally adapting the president of Russia was from the minute he hit the tarmac. This is very unusual. Let me preface what I'm about to say about the evolution of Russian thinking by just pointing out for our audience and for our discussion, we, meaning Russia and India, are engaged on the same side in at least two major wars: the war of civilizations in which Europe and the United States are against us, clearly against Russia, and secondarily against India. And that throws us together in a very important way. Second, we're engaged in the war for the sea lanes, the war for the oil trade, the war to keep the high seas open and not closed, as Trump's pirate vessel armadas are trying to do in the Caribbean, the South China Sea, the Baltic Sea, and now even the Mediterranean. Now, so we have at least two wars going on, in addition to the Russian war on the battlefield in the Ukraine. Now, coming to these two wars, which are not new for either India or Russia, I'd have to say something like the following. We are old enough to remember the kind of solidarity, strategic comity, and comradeship strategically there was during the communist period for many reasons on one side and the other side, and solidarity was one of the results. And on that basis, the current strategic foundation between Russia and India was founded. With the collapse of communist rule, the 1991, let's call it a change of government, but not a coup d'etat, but let's say a change of regime, some of the significant individuals in Soviet and Russian policy making, like Evgeny Primakov and Leonid Shebashin, were lost. Primakov lasted a bit longer than the KGB chief Shebashin, but the level of their understanding of India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Middle East, that level of understanding was not only lost, it was defeated politically and then suppressed. When they were gone, they were replaced, let's say the comity, the comradeship, the strategic thinking between Moscow and Delhi was sustained by the military side. And they were, until relatively recently, weak in the political faction fighting that's characteristic of all capitals, but certainly characteristic of Moscow. Worse than that, there was the rise of the pro-American, pro-European, white supremacist doctrines of the Russian intelligentsia. And you still see lots of that, lots of it. I regret to say. Not even war against Russia by the United States, not even sanctions against individuals by the US and the European Union have replaced the degree to which the Russian academic class, you might say, or the intellectual class, and a large chunk of the political class and a chunk of the business class remained pro-American and pro-European. It's quite an irony to see last week, for example, the European Union, in its desperation to continue the war against Ukraine and punish Russia, put on its latest sanctions list one academic from MGIMO, the International Relations University Center, Primakov Center, academically speaking, in Moscow, and 3 Valdai Club academics. This is very amusing because the Valdai Club was a Kremlin-funded unit to encourage European and American academics to be more favorable towards Russia by punishing them after they failed in that job. The message is to the pro-American, pro-European analysts, publicists, intellectual class, that there's no hope for you in Europe and the United States for the future, win or lose the war on the battlefield. And that means that there has to be a reorientation towards India and towards China. It makes it inevitable, in the same way that the economic war against the Russian oligarchs deprived them of their assets abroad, confiscated their access to European toy boats and palaces and beach houses, and also their assets and income and banking accounts in Europe and the United States. So both of these factors drive what has been the pro-Western orientation that replaced, let's call it for what it was, red solidarity, communist doctrine of solidarity and national independence, replaced that and is now being replaced itself on a completely new basis with India and China. And one of the very important, results of the Putin-Modi conversations is the understanding on both sides, at least at Putin's level and at your level, if not yet filtering down to the business community who are underrepresented in the delegation, that until and unless Russia begins to invest in India and not simply seek to increase trade, the economic base for long-term strategic partnership will be limited to the military side. That's good for both Russia and India because we both have wars to fight. There's no doubt about that. We both have a sensitivity to terrorism, internal and externally financed terrorism. Unfortunately, the Russian side doesn't have quite the precision and competence of your thinking about that. But on the other hand, there are very important signals that the Indian side conveyed to Putin, and the logistics and base agreement is an important beginning that Russia must invest in India. And one of the preconditions for that is a change in the banking arrangements and a solution to the ruble-rupee inter-system payment problem. With those possibilities come and a change that'll have to be driven by the Kremlin. The banking system and the investment system will more effectively interact between the two, and that can significantly fill the gap, I might say, between the Primakov-Shevashin generation and the one that we have now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. There is a change of scene overall, and there is an inevitability about the Russia-India partnership going ahead. Arun Sahgal, sir, John did mention that Russia would have to reorient itself towards China and towards India. And in a sense, Russia is trying to, put in a triangle or restart that old triangle of Russia, India, China. Given the fact that we have our problems with China and they're not running away anywhere, right? Notwithstanding the easing of tensions between China and India, we have our issues. We also know that Russia and China have a friendship which is strengthening by the day, but that has historical craters in between. I don't know how they're going to square that up, how those potholes are going to get squared. And I also don't see this triangle, closing with the issues between India and India and China. So how do you see these two relationships going forward, and how do you think Russia will handle it, and how do you think we should handle it?
Interesting question. Far-reaching consequences. Okay, let me just try. My first fundamental point is that there is a reappraisal of the global system. And in this reappraisal of the global system, some basic determinants are coming to fore. First fundamental point is that the Western Hemisphere and the Atlantis perspective will remain the driving force for the West. They will continue to be a major source of their strength, dominance, and influence. And in that, they will continue to also exhibit the same kind of influence in the Arab Peninsula, primarily for both for mineral resources as well as for dominating the sea lines of communication in that particular area. Having said that, there is a realization which is also coming, I feel, among the Russians and also within the Indian establishment, that if you are going to become a 10 to 12 trillion dollar economy, you have to enhance your trade. Now, if you have to enhance your trade, who are your big trading partners of the future? Is the big trading partner of the future is the West? How much is Europe is the new big trading partner, or it's becoming imperative for a country like India to enhance its trade in three particular directions. One is Russia. That was why the instance whole emphasis was in sorting out the rupee ruble trade, and also saying is that we have just a $15 billion trade, take out the oil, and we have to increase it to minimum 50 to $75 billion trade. That's one aspect. China will become a fundamental player in this trade game and investment, as well as in the supply chain game. We like it or we don't like it, but it is something we have to look at China from a perspective how the Americans are looking at China. There is an industrial and trade relationship intrinsic between the two sides, despite the fact there are biggest strategic competitors of each other. So that's the kind of perception that we have to create. We cannot take our eye off the ground. We can't take out the eye off the barrel. But the fundamental issue remains is that we have to become an reasonably credible, strong, strategic, economic and trade partners, and this is an important. Third issue is the area that we are trying to look at is that United States will remain consequential to us, but if the present trend continues, it's not going to be a major trading partner for India. It will remain an important trading partner, not the largest trading partner of India. So we will then have to look at Europe. So now, as far as Europe is concerned, we do not. We have to take a calibrated view of how do we look at the future of Europe, how much of a strength and credibility it has as a trade player. Already, I see sanctions being imposed on the Europeans by the Chinese. They're having problems in their own trade relationships. The GDPs of Europe are going down. So its ability to fill that gap to us is going to be limited. Now we come to the fourth area of this thing is that is the global south, that is Africa basically. Here again, there are opportunities, but they are down the line in another 10 to 15 years, depending upon how stability is ensured in that particular region. So, taking all that into account, two, three basic issues emerge. One, we have to continue to engage with all partners, all players in what we call as a multi-alignment or a strategic autonomy or whatever it is. I call it an interest-based relationships. We have to create interest-based relationships with every one of them. Secondly, we cannot be looking at the world from from the perspective of adversaries, containment, etc. But we are looking at terms of challenges, and that challenger, particularly to us from China on our boundary and in the maritime sphere, is going to continue. But the fundamental point again is that elements like Relos, which pushes Russia into the Indian Ocean region for various purposes, becomes an important aspect, and so it becomes an important construct of our Russian policy. Yet, we will have to ensure that we have a certain degree of maritime prominence within our backyard to at least control and ensure that the sea lines of communications from West Asia to Malacca are not contained or constrained by any outside players. So if you take all these things into account, the jury is that India has to follow a multi interest based policies with all the major players. A, B, it does not have the luxury to have this or that. And number two is it has to maximize its trade and ensure that economy of about 8 to 10 trillion dollars, another 10 years or so maximum, if not earlier. And third is enhance its technological capacities and capabilities so the country becomes a credible player. So it's taking all these into account. The India's strategic options are very clear, and in that, the short point is we have to remain strategic partnerships with Russia is important, relationships and partnership with America are important, and engagement at a much higher degree with China is equally important.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. What you actually said, like, if I put it in a little slightly different way, uh, for India, USA and Russia both became inescapable, right? For the simple reason that we've had a relationship with them now, especially at the military level, for the over the past quarter of a century, which are too deep rooted, and these will go on for the next 25 years, whether we like it or not. And that uh, cements a whole lot of other relationships which will have to grow. There's no two ways about it. We might not like the USA for what it's doing today to us, but we don't have a choice of getting away from it. That's the first thing. Europe is some place where we need to expand. And China, again, the way we have grown with China, we will have to live with a China which is both a challenger to us strategically and a competitor, and at the same time an adversary. So with India, China, we're going to have a layered kind of an existence. So if you have to increase your exposure to EU and be better, have better relationship with EU, then it's incumbent that, and also sustain our relationship with China, and to some extent also sustain our relationship with USA. Then something has to give in the Russia-Ukraine sphere. All right. What's going to happen? Where does it go? Do you think it gives us the space to act the way we are? And we need to see where this is going. So I'd like John. John, please let us know as to where do you think this whole business of Russia and Ukraine war is going? How does it affect EU? Give us a bird's eye view of what's the present status and where do you see it's going?
Thanks for the cue, Ravi. But before we get to that particular practical battle, I'd like to add to what Arun has just said. And
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Think of us as two wise men and me saying what is essentially a very important part of the information warfare that's going on now. But underneath that, there's a younger generation. And we have to be thinking how to create a foundation in the younger generation, a generation younger than we are, who value gunnershot as it deserves to be valued in India, who value different websites and different media in the United States, Europe, and Russia. We have to understand how they respond to information warfare and ideological warfare in the coming 20, 25 years, because that's the generation that's affected by, let's say it plainly, the racism and the visa discrimination and the Trump administration is inflicting on India right now as part of its trade war. We have to understand that Australia is also, as a member of the Quad, in the immediate aftermath of this Bondi Beach shooting, has decided to intensify ideological screening of immigrants and visitors to Australia. Now, guess what that's going to mean for Indians? It means particular scrutiny, and I might say prejudice, towards Indian Muslims. That's what's going to happen. That's what tightened screening, visa screening means in Australia. Tightened visa screening in the United States means the same. What we therefore have to be looking at is building not simply a counter-information war capability. The Russian side introduced RT India in the last few weeks since Putin's visit. This is not the only form of building an information base, building a new generational base that I'm thinking of. We have to be thinking of how to create the base that will understand what you've just said and continue the capacity to advance what we think now into the future when we won't be around anymore. And we have to, in this context, understand, to be put it bluntly, who's racist, who's not. And this, to a certain extent, depends on building a business base. To a certain extent, it means building military coordination. To a certain extent, it means building freedom of movement, including, as Arun has said, freedom of movement in the high seas. So anyone or any power or any group of powers that threaten or threatens to cut us off, Russia at the Danish Straits, India at the Malacca Straits, but both of us at the Strait of Hormuz or the Suez Canal or the Dardanelles. Anyone who makes war on our shipping is directly influencing the long-term future as we train our children and our successor generation to understand what freedom means. Now, those are big words, and I don't mean to waffle. I do mean to say we have to understand how vicious the information warfare that's currently going on is. We have to understand, exactly as Arun said, how to keep the Malacca Straits open from Indian point of view. We have to understand how to keep the Arctic routes open. If we don't keep them open, we can't trade. The other side wins. The other side will then inflict their costs on us. This is inevitable. And we're right now in a good position because you raised the question, how's the Ukraine war going? Well, the answer is pretty well for Russia. So well, in fact, that the allies are falling apart with each other. France versus Germany is the most important element of the splintering of the European alliance. And second, the Europeans versus the United States. Each one of them, country by country and group by group, are frightened now of being seen to have lost the war in the Ukraine. And the Russian side is steadily advancing into a position where it can inflict such terms of capitulation as the Trump administration will face a lose-lose Kabul moment, a Saigon 75 moment. Trump is quicker at understanding the political seriousness of such a defeat than the little Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, is. But then he's committed to rearming Germany as the surviving militarily dominant power of Europe. In that sense, continuing the war for Germany is a German national interest to dominate Europe for the next generation. It's obviously contested by the French, and the British are now much too weak to contest anything. They're only good at deception operations now, and the only people they deceive are themselves. So we have a very interesting breakup, I think, of European unity, ideologically speaking, and in national interest terms. And this is advantageous for both India and advantageous for Russia and advantageous for China.
Yep, I think so. Yeah, what you said is a broken up EU will allow inroads for India and China and Russia. On that, there's no this thing. But let's look at it transatlantic. Sehgal sir, transatlantic, you've seen Trump withdrawing virtually from the Russia-Ukraine war. He's got very little remnant interest in what's happening there, except making money out of the Europeans. And he's more focusing on the Americas, the Latin American and the Greenland. Restarted on the Greenland journey. He's going into Venezuela and the Middle East. Middle of uh, Middle Americas, as I call it, and the Latin American zone. And he's come out with a new NSS, which virtually says abandon Europe, forget about Middle East, focus on the Americas and the Indo-Pacific. In this context, where do you see Trump, India, Russia, US going, and where do you see India-US relationship going?
Okay. See, Trump has an issue. Trump has a problem. If you take your mind to the Afghan war, when he took over the presidency, he was trying to resolve the Afghan issue because he are going on for a war for the last 20 years, which is meaningless war. In his perception, the Ukraine-Russian war is again a meaningless war from his perspective, which is siphoning funds from the United States of America, providing him no strategic advantage. And like John just now said, the Russians are doing very well, and the Europeans have no chance in hell to do anything without the Americans. So the idea basically bothering him is, how much do I commit into this alliance? The second idea that he germinated in this whole scenario is make Europeans strong militarily. Now, the question that has to be asked is, what does military strong Europe means? What does a German military reincarnation means for Europe? It has a huge amount of psychological issues of the Second World War, which people are very concerned about. The fact is that I used to do exercises with Mr. Andrew Marshall, and his bigger concern was the Russo-German, or like the Russo-Persian Empire, a Russo-German detente taking place in Europe. That used to be the biggest worry. Now, the question which is bothering is that in the current scheme of things, is Europe a military perspective or a military endearment to the United States, or an economic? So the Americans are taking cognizance of the fact is that it is important for us to trade with Europe, maintain a certain degree of stability in Europe, but do not invest far too much on it. On the other hand, what is happening is that he is also look at his NSS. His NSS is soft on Russia. It has multiple messages for the Chinese. At one level, it's a containment. Another level, it is cooperation. Another level, he continues to ensure a certain degree of American presence. The Indo-Pacific is important to them. They cannot. America gets evicted from Indo-Pacific. America becomes a continental power in Americas. It ceases to be a global player. That's the ultimate the construct of what is happening. So if you look his NSS closely, it is sending a multiple messages. It is at one level he is preparing to deal with China on commercial tariff and economic terms, and also resolve the dilemmas of his critical minerals and other critical technologies till such time he can build up his own resources, etc. On the other, he has to have a staying power in Asia, and for staying power in Asia, he needs allies and partners, and that is why if you study the NSS, he is playing a lot of emphasis on India's position and India's capabilities in the region. But it is also falling short of committing America to any degree of a long-term strategic partnership in terms of what the Biden was trying to do is build up India's resources, technological, military, other capacities, and also induct India as a credible partner in dealing with other issues like maritime domain initiative, cyber security, and issues like that. So, so the fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves is that we have a model in front of us. The model is in the Op Sindoor or the May conflict, two strategic partners aligned very well to support each other. And in this case, the Chinese supported the Pakistanis right through the operations. Can we, under various contingencies or situations, look for American support in terms of the similar kind of support from United States in our contingencies? A, with the India's China contingencies. B, on the line similar to the American think tankers and their strategists are asking India to commit itself into the Taiwan contingency or be a strong partner in South China Sea as well as in East Asia. So the dilemma is at this point in time is for the United States, it wants to hold on to the Indo-Pacific, build up capacities and capabilities in Indo-Pacific, leverage India to its own interest, but does not want to give away anything to India and continue to his economic coercion of India through tariffs. All the other programs that India has signed from 2023 onwards are in limbo. Joint production not happening. Engines delay happening. So, in short, at this particular point in time, I would say is that ball is in United States court as to understand as to how much of investment, political, economic, and technological investment it wants to make in India. India is not shying away from that investment. India will be happy to see it, but India will certainly now look at terms and conditions of that investment and will not sign a blank check for the United States. So the NSS, from our perspective, is a rather a bland document of aspirational issues or something of some, or basically also in reality, but it doesn't convey very much in terms of American strategic thinking on a long-term basis, at least for till his end of his administration. I don't get any clarity out of this. Thank you.
But it
Oh,
can't.
yeah,
Well,
please.
sorry to interrupt, Ravi. Speaking as a former U.S. Presidential staff man, these documents are the result of a faction fight. They take months of drafting an interdepartmental argument. So the effect of interdepartmental argument, even with a chaotic administration such as Trump introduced, which was in the middle of purging. Remember, this is a document produced between factions, each of which was being purged of its senior staff. Okay, so you've got to put it mildly, suboptimal conditions for agreement and consensus, suboptimal conditions for the Pentagon, the State Department policy planning staff, the White House, the Office of Management and Budget, the intelligence agencies, and so forth. You can't get them to agree on specifics when their senior staff are being removed. It's very difficult. So what you end up with is a document that's least offensive to all the contesting factions. What therefore mustn't be done is to draw conclusions from a paper that's produced under these conditions as a prediction of what they're going to do when or if they get their act together, or, as Arun has just said, after Trump is replaced by a new administration. Now, that said, what we see, what I see, is not an abandonment of Europe, rather an insistence on one principle of unipolarity, one hegemonic principle, and that is, in all regions, US coercion must prevail. Or in Trump's version, I must win, win, win everywhere. Now, whether that's trade term with China or military dictation to Denmark to take Greenland, or whether it means scaring Chinese off an attack on Taiwan, or whether it means removing the government of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. It's the same principle. US coercion must be respected. US coercion must work, whatever the methods. Now, we've talked before about the way in which let's call it the brains trust. It's an exaggeration to speak of brains when applied to that regime, but nonetheless, the brains trust of the Trump administration, Elbridge Colby and others, wanted to see sequencing of war capacities so that the US wouldn't waste its capacities in a losing battlefield in the Ukraine, but would earn its profit in facilitating the Europeans to go on fighting. That's, of course, now generated German rearmament and the revival of Hitlerism as a specter haunting the rest of Europe and the world. Sequencing from the Ukrainian battlefield doesn't mean abandoning Europe. It means rearming Germany. It means arming Poland to a degree not seen before, including nuclear weapons, I might add. It means creating a new nuclear weapons platform in Romania, for God's sake, and then moving northwards toward the Arctic. You see the replacement of Finnish neutrality with Finland as an anti-Russian fighting platform, Sweden, Norway, all the way up to Greenland, and then across the Arctic to begin the process of rearming Japan with nuclear weapons, I might add. And none of these processes of sequencing represent significant concessions to some of the flashpoints. The US intends to support Israel to go on threatening war, a second round of war against Iran in the south, and enlarge that capacity with rearming or arming Azerbaijan in the same cause. On the other side, we see Japan and South Korea being rearmed at US behest with no consideration for what might be a more peaceable negotiation with North Korea. And so we go down the map and we see Australia becoming increasingly war-fighting platform that would in fact threaten the Malacca Straits, which are a key, as Arun has said, Indian strategic asset to keep open. I mean, I can go on, but you understand the point I'm making here. I don't see the NSS problematic as its creation has been, missing or changing some fundamental concepts in US hegemonic policy. And those concepts, region by region, represent threats to the rest of the multipolar world, however you count them. And that means complex calculations of where one's national interest is. I'm in no way disagreeing with either of you, but I think we do need to understand that the NSS is in no way beneficial to anyone outside the United States, that is.
Yeah, that's a fair one because I would say that Trump will make an NSS which suits him and not anyone else, and especially at a time when he's not getting anything from anyone, so he'll do it. Well, that's the way nature of the game we are playing, and we have to live by what he has put it out. It's out. It's it's a moot point whether that NSS will ever come into force. Because I think the way things are changing in US itself and the transiency of the Trump presidency, you will see this thing changing. And the dynamics, the way world is going, you can't ignore what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and what happening still in Middle East and what's happening in around the South China Sea, and put out a concept which is yet untested and for the futurist. It will not happen. So you are ignoring the present and going into something futuristic, which is absolutely in the gray zone. Well, let me get back to India because I want to finish this talk with India because we've gone all around. We've seen the different strands of relationships between countries which are emerging or have emerged. From an Indian perspective, and this is where I'd like both your comments. From an Indian perspective, what emerges very clearly is, look, we have to deal with USA whether we like it or not. I've said that earlier, well into the future. Europe is a relationship which is iffy at this point. China will be an adversarial relationship considering the fact the way they've helped Pakistan in Op Sindoor. We can't ignore it. And it will be a multi-layered relationship. Japan, another promising relationship, is slow, steady, and things will take its own time. And in any case, we have had a good equation with Japan. It will continue. It will not anyway mercurially shoot up. The one relationship which I feel, which has more scope strategically, trade-wise, and militarily, is with Russia. And given Russia's own constraints, India, Russia, where do you see the future of this relationship going in the context of what all we have spoken? I think from our own side in India, we are very clear that we have to take it further. Is Russia ready for it, given the fact that it has its equations with China? I'd like your views first, sir. Then will ask John for his views. Sahgal, sir, all yours.
Okay. So, in his opening remarks, I think John referred to the changing perspective. There was a perspective during the Soviet Union of India being a strong partner. Post 1991, the new Kremlin and the new powers that be wanting to have a closer relationships with Europe and West. And I mean, every time one has gone to Russia, there are a bunch of people who still, they psychologically look at themselves as part of the European, this thing, although they are the Orthodox Church, but they psychologically think of them as Europeans, and they are not very happy with being called Eurasian power, etc. But the fact of the matter is that the way the dice was served at that particular juncture, they had to make a deal, and they made a deal. And the deal was Eurasia, Central Asia included, China was part and parcel of the deal. And certainly India was an important player because India continued to support and sustain the transition. Some people are not aware of the fact that our massive armament purchases between 1991 to 2000 was largely responsible of ensuring the Russian military-industrial complex remained, and people did not get food to eat. So it's not something which they have forgotten. But yes, over a period of time, it has become more transactional. So the question you are raising is that if there is a resolution of Ukraine conflict or Russia becomes member of G8, etc., will that shift take place or not, or will India remain as important a strategic partner? I think over a period of time, in some countries, you can sort of take, there are political leaderships in the country, and people understand that the transition that will happen, even if Russia becomes a closer to the West or becomes a part of the re-inducted into the supply chains and the global trade systems by the West, India, with its growing economy, will remain an important player. India will remain an important partner and an important player. And the fact is, from Indian perspective, is that we will also remain invested in three areas. One is strategic. We are the kind of strategic support that we have got from Russia will not get from anybody else. Number two is in our military dependence, and the fact is that there is a degree of, we have over a period of time understood how to use and exploit the Russian weapon systems, and they remain are continue to remain a mainstay. It's not easy for any country to shift completely, although there would be a shift, but the military component will remain germane to the whole issue. And thirdly is that if the Russian economy picks up and it becomes a $6 to $7 trillion economy, they would love to have, there would be a great opportunity for trade between us and the Russians. And having said all that, my last point is, in strategic terms, there will be no guarantees given by the West to Russia. Perhaps there will be some guarantees given by the fact that the India and Russia relationship has always stood the test of time. So to that extent, I think the planners and the people who are in Kremlin are smart enough to continue to remain invested in India. And as far as other areas concerned, China and etc., you already rightly said that we'll remain invested. So it's going to be more a shift from strategic oriented relationships to more, as things improve, to more trade and economic investments kind of relationship, which suits the world. Hopefully, it'll bring a little bit of more stability in the world order. So in short, India will remain invested and so will Russia be.
Thanks a lot, sir. Your views, John, all yours.
Oh, well, I agree with Arun. But then we would agree. Our generation agrees. The emphasis I'm putting, which I think was really very well discussed by Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, is how do we create the basis for the next generation, for the succession generation? And yes, that means mutual investment. It does. But let's focus on one crucial, let's say, the spearhead of Indian investments, the diaspora, is it not? And there's not yet a significant Indian diaspora in Russia. The Indian diaspora in the United States is about to be flattened, significantly reduced, losing its political power, its economic future, unless the H-1B visa matter gets changed remarkably, and I don't anticipate that will happen. But the Indian diaspora in the UK, the Indian diaspora in Australia, the Indian diaspora in Canada and the United States are extremely important educators for the next generation to answer the questions we're answering now. Will that generation, or does that generation, agree with us now? Well, it's our job to educate them and to persuade them. You're doing the best you can, Ravi, with your with Gunnershot. But let's look at how to educate the diaspora, the Indian diaspora looking towards Russia, which is capable of generating significant new pharmaceutical, perfumes, all sorts of manufactured product investment in Russia. Let's look at the problem of educating younger Russians to invest in Russia, in India. Yes, the level of confidence in technology transfer and investment on the military level is very valuable, and it's going to stay, as Arun has said. But there are Arun has written and discussed the naval possibilities when India moves into the Arctic Channel, when India projects towards the Malacca Straits and the Russian fleet sails through. We've seen the kind of desperate bluffing that Trump is making in the Caribbean. The one thing I'm quite sure President Trump's reputation will go down in history to be is that the most brazen form of running away ever displayed by a United States president. The man is learning how to retreat by appearing to win, how to win by not appearing to lose. These are the things he's demonstrating even as we speak on the shores of the Caribbean, on the battlefield in the Ukraine. He'll try it in Greenland. He'll try it everywhere. And each time, with significant resistance of all types, he will retreat. He will run away. His bluff will be called. He'll throw his cards in, but he won't appear to be doing so. Fine. From the adversary point of view, it's the outcome, not the appearance. Now, how do we educate the new generation of India and the new generation of Russia to understand what we've learned? Because it's not easy, and you know better than me how experience tells. So my view is we agree, the three of us. We then have to say, what are the forms of information contest, education, shared ideology, the reduction of prejudice and racism? These are all much more important topics than one often finds in polite discussion. Racism is not in polite discussion. It's always in impolite discussion. But you know better than me just how perfidious and how common it is in imperial dealings with India.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I thought today we've had a wide-ranging discussion on many topics, and it was quite unstructured. And I just, as both my seniors spoke, I just led them on. And to a large extent, I led myself into it. I must be honest. Right?
Is that a regret?
No, it's a damn good thing. That's how things should be. We should be open-minded enough to, get over our fears of what we shouldn't discuss and discuss them. It's only then that we can open out and look for a better future. And I thought, my own view, I must put my own view, I'll end it at that. If there's one relationship which India has with many countries, which has stood the test of time and which can stand the test of time in the future, it is India-Russia, right? There's a proviso to it, which John finally said in the end, the diaspora element, which means, if I put it in simple terms, the people-to-people contact between India and Russia has to go up. Or alternately, the people-to-people contact between India and Russia has to go back to the original. Let me put it, those of you who of this generation and the future generation, I still remember the days when I used to interact with a lot of Russians in Nasik, Devlali, buying potatoes and tomatoes on weekends when I was a young officer. And that was a time when a lot of Indians used to go to Russia. A lot of our military friends used to go to Russia. They used to go to Russia, at that time USSR, as if, catching a local bus and going to Moscow. And people from there used to come here. When that interaction stopped, a certain amount of transactionality has come between India and Russia relations. I think for the future of many things, this has to revive itself. And this is the biggest takeaway I have today, that for the stability of global order, India-Russia relations have to grow, and they have to grow on the basis of people-to-people contact and relationships. This is where I'd like to end. Thanks a lot, sirs, and thanks a lot, and Merry Christmas once again. Though it's today the Boxing Day in Australian terms, and a Test match on, where Australia has packed up for 152 today in Melbourne, and England was reeling last at 53 for 7 or 8 when I saw. That was in between the podcasts as it was going on. Right? And this is for all the cricket aficionados. But then we are heading into a new year. I wish John and Brigadier Arun Sahgal a very happy new year
Thank you, sir.
in a
Thank
week's
you.
time. And I'm sure we'll be back on New Year to have a discussion with everyone. With this, thank you, John, and thank you, Sahgal sir. Jai Hind to all of you.